So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to Puerto Rico, Greater Mexico, and LatinX Reproductive Justice in the US. My name is Catherine Brewster. Pleased to meet you. A feminist, social, and environmental justice activist, and producer of the online documentary series, Stand Up, Speak Out, The Personal Politics of Women's Rights. I'm honored to be chair of this panel, filling in for Dr. Iris Lopez, a national and international expert on sterilization among Puerto Rican and other racialized women in the United States, who drew together the amazing panelists you'll hear from over the next 2 hours, including Iris herself. She asked me to chair this panel because she taught today and is having difficulty with her voice. A little about how we'll proceed. I'll briefly introduce each panelist before she speaks. And I want to apologize to you and the speakers ahead of time for any mispronunciations of names. Unfortunately, I don't speak Spanish. And to the speakers, if I don't quite capture the essence of what you do in my introduction. But for those of you attending to learn more about these amazing and accomplished women, please look for their bios in the conference program. As you listen to the panelists today, we encourage you to be curious, to be open to new insights, and just to discover inspiration as to the next steps in the fight for reproductive justice. We're going to start the exploration of eugenics in Puerto Rico and the mainland USA with the story, as told in a short documentary, of the personal impact of the Puerto Rican sterilization campaign and experimental birth control trial in the life of a Puerto Rican American woman, Ariana Gonzalez Stoquez.
Growing up, really my mother's Puerto Rican culture kind of was the dominant culture of our household. And really being able to spend a lot of time learning about Puerto Rico by physically being there. My great-grandmother, she gave birth, as far as I know, to 14 children. They lived on a farm they had a farm in rural Puerto Rico. So life was hard, but it was hard because of the policies of the United States. The United States' policies were policies of stricture. They were policies of limitation. Part of it was to squeeze people off land and into factories. There wasn't a lot of choice in terms of access to reproduction. So any of the kind of contraceptives that were available in the United States in the 30s weren't available to women at all in Puerto Rico. It's not like they went in and they were like, let's give childcare to women so they could work. You know, it's like engineering the options. They weren't handing out, some of the earliest forms of contraception. They were offering or enacting sterilization. The Catholic Church on the island was certainly very active in trying to prevent access to contraception in any way. So sterilization became, for some women, the only option because those were the clinics that were set up. You can see in some of the records, it wasn't understood by every woman, I think, that sterilization was a permanent procedure. And it was kind of described in some things you can read as birth control, which is obviously not what it is. There were policies that upon the second or third birth, the woman was sterilized. And in order to access care, they had to consent. There's records of women having to consent to sterilization in order to be able to deliver their child in the hospital. There's a lot of power dynamics there when you're young and you're trying to make a living and you see the poverty of your family, and this is offered as a way to have some control over your life. But I don't think, like, when we think about what informed consent looks like, I don't think that that was really largely at play. The incredibly high number of women who were sterilized is just kind of staggering to think about. Angelina, she probably had la operación, right? She didn't have children. She was the first one who came. She was the one who was most embedded in factory work. I think she probably was sterilized because she was in factory work. She came here on her own. I think she likely didn't know it was a permanent procedure. So my mother, after she had me, she opted for sterilization. And she was like, oh, la operación, right? That's how it was known, the operation. Like, I had it. It's just something that, like, you did. I remember in that conversation with my mother, her even saying that the tubal ligation she had, she could have reversed it to have children. So, like, there's still percolated a belief that la operación was not something permanent. It's really pretty clear that, like, the desire for population control was at play. And the view was that Puerto Ricans just had too many children. Population control was a way to ensure that Puerto Ricans couldn't, demand too much from the United States in terms of, the financial relationship that existed. What's been interesting too over the last few years for me is to really understand the complexity of it. There's, like, the forced sterilization. There's the sterilization that happened because there was no other option. Women had no option, but they took an option because they needed to control their reproduction. There's a community that is sort of outside San Juan and became kind of the locus for where the birth control pill was tested without consent. Informed consent, which is what we, pride in any kind of clinical trials. So there was no informed consent. But it was the trial that led then to the mass distribution of the pill in the United States. I made the decision long ago to not take birth control. It became layered with all of these reverberations and residue of the process of colonization of Puerto Rico. It's important to know how the imperialist project of the United States has been exerted through the bodies of women in Puerto Rico, and still is.
So I want to give a big thank you and a shout out to Ariana for her willingness to be vulnerable and share her story. Ariana's story and that of other women speaking about the importance in their personal lives of having and the consequences of not having economic independence, political power, and reproductive autonomy are told in the Stand Up, Speak Out, Personal Politics of Women's Rights. The short documentaries are available free of charge on the BC Voices Inc.'s website, and the link is in the chat. Our first panelist, Alice Colon Warren, PhD in sociology from Fordham University in New York, will talk to us about the historical trajectory of birth control in Puerto Rico throughout the 20th century. Please welcome Alice, Reproductive Justice in Puerto Rico.
Sí, yo agradezco a Benedict, Miroslava y a todas las personas que han organizado esta conferencia y a Iris por invitarme a participar en esta discusión. Pues, un saludo a todas las participantes en esta sesión. Mi ponencia tiene que ver con la historia ciertamente bien apretada de la situación de la natalidad en Puerto Rico. Como vieron en el documental, Puerto Rico cobró notoriedad como país en que se experimentaron métodos contraceptivos y donde se alcanzaron más temprano entre los niveles más altos de esterilización femenina en el mundo. Pero el caso de Puerto Rico es también particular y notable, porque no se trata de las esterilizaciones forzadas por parte del Estado a través de la coacción y la violencia, violación de derechos que obviamente condenamos. Sí, el Estado en Puerto Rico ha tenido desde el siglo pasado, de hecho, una política ambivalente e inconsistente que ha incluido dejar hacer a las iniciativas y el poder de entidades privadas. Y las puertorriqueñas han respondido de manera activa a sus condiciones de vida en sus decisiones reproductivas, aunque hubiera ciertamente entre estas consentimientos cuestionables. Es importante denunciar las instancias de abuso en estas prácticas, pero desde lo que hoy definimos como derechos reproductivos, en este escrito yo quiero también reconocer la agencia de mujeres pobres que utilizaron las políticas eugenésicas y neomalthusianas, de acuerdo a sus propias interpretaciones y necesidades. Así,
políticas. Dessa forma,
5 acciones restringen todavía la libertad y justicia reproductiva entre las puertorriqueñas. Es a esas condiciones que entiendo que debemos dirigir nuestras acciones. Así que ahora paso a la apretada síntesis de la historia. Como colonia, Puerto Rico ha estado sujeta a políticas económicas capitalistas que han limitado las oportunidades de empleo y mantenido la pobreza en la población. Durante las primeras décadas del siglo XX, las industrias cañeras, tabacaleras y de la aguja a domicilio destruyeron la industria cafetalera y la agricultura de subsistencia. Desde los 1940, el proyecto de industrialización Operación Manos a la Obra destruía esas industrias para imponer la manufactura de mano de obra intensiva. Y desde los 60, la fuga de esas fábricas hacia países con salarios más bajos movía la economía a industrias de mayor tecnología y capital, las cuales desde los 90 han reducido operaciones debido a la gradual eliminación de incentivos contributivos que les ofrecía el gobierno norteamericano. Aunque se expandieron los servicios de educación, salud pública y sociales desde principios de siglo, desde los 1990 comenzaron también recortes en el empleo y los servicios estatales. Ofrecer a las mujeres pobres el acceso al control de natalidad que ya practicaban las demás recursos. Para ello, proponían reducirles la presión social y económica de nacimientos adicionales y mejorar las condiciones de vida y la herencia de la población. Así que es cierto que desde comienzos de la dominación norteamericana, funcionarios coloniales racializaban el pueblo puertorriqueño como necesitado de civilización, o sea, americanización, y como ignorantes e incapaces de una reproducción y crianza responsable, ante lo cual favorecían la reducción poblacional. Los programas de control de natalidad en Puerto Rico, sin embargo, han sido inconsistentes y han dependido del apoyo de políticas norteamericanas. No fue hasta entrados los 1930 que junto a profesionales de la isla y aparte del movimiento de control natal en la isla, se instalaron servicios gubernamentales de control de natalidad vinculados a programas en línea con el nuevo trato en Estados Unidos y afines a lo que hoy llamaríamos eugenesia blanda. Pero desde entrados los 1940 se redujeron esos servicios y a principios de los 70 el gobierno central en Puerto Rico se negó a oficiar un programa extendido de control de natalidad debido a la presión de la Iglesia Católica con sus movimientos morales, además de sectores independentistas que denunciaban el control de población como genocida. A través de este periodo, lo que hubo fue un apoyo tácito, limitado, ambivalente y negado públicamente a los servicios ofrecidos por parte de organizaciones privadas y su coordinación con unidades de salud y hospitales gubernamentales. Los servicios de planificación familiar en el sistema de salud gubernamental en Puerto Rico no volvieron pues a extenderse a través de la isla hasta finales de los 60, cuando en el contexto de la llamada explosión poblacional, el gobierno de Estados Unidos incorporó el acceso al control de natalidad como parte de su guerra contra la pobreza y de su ayuda internacional como parte de la Guerra Fría contra el comunismo. En la isla, para 1974, se creó la Secretaría Auxiliar de Planificación Familiar, que extendió el acceso a anticonceptivos y promovió abiertamente la esterilización, esta vez de manera agresiva y con fondos del gobierno de Puerto Rico, además de federales. No obstante, desde finales de los 70, los recortes de fondos federales para planificación familiar por los sectores republicanos opuestos al aborto en Estados Unidos, junto a las políticas de privatización y el impacto de la crisis fiscal en el sistema de salud pública en Puerto Rico, han vuelto a limitar el acceso gubernamental a la planificación familiar para las mujeres indigentes. Pero el espacio dejado por el Estado entre el 40 y el 70 fue llenado por entidades privadas. El movimiento en favor del control de natalidad, reagrupado en la Asociación Pro Salud Maternal e Infantil, logró que en 1937 se implantaran leyes que permitieron ofrecer estos servicios, así como la anticoncepción, incluida la esterilización voluntaria. Otra ley que permitía la esterilización compulsoria, ya extendida en Estados Unidos, fue poco utilizada en la isla. A través de los 40 a los 60, Puerto Rico se constituyó en laboratorio de cambio social. Además de organizaciones no gubernamentales como la Asociación de Estudios de Población, luego Asociación Puertorriqueña Pro Bienestar de la Familia, fundaciones, investigadores y compañías farmacéuticas norteamericanas realizaron numerosos estudios sociales y demográficos, experimentaron una diversidad de anticonceptivos, incluida la píldora de Novid, el fomento y el Depo-Provera, y con el respaldo amplio de médicos, se extendió la esterilización en hospitales privados, pero también públicos. Aunque hubo algunas críticas entre los sectores favorecedores del control de natalidad, hubo en esta trayectoria excesos y abusos. La experimentación de métodos no contó con los estándares de consentimiento informado adecuados y los directores de las pruebas en Estados Unidos hicieron caso omiso de las quejas de su ineficacia y efectos secundarios, lo que minó la confianza de las mujeres en los contraceptivos. El celo de médicos, por su parte, llevó a prácticas coercitivas como políticas de exigir la esterilización para atender a las mujeres en el proceso de parto, la esterilización de mujeres que no habían parido, la presión de la autoridad médica en la consejería y la desinformación en cuanto a la irreversibilidad del procedimiento. Durante la duración del programa estatal de los 1970, se denunciaron también cuotas y la esterilización de menores. Lo que hubo de abuso, sin embargo, no niega la necesidad del control de natalidad para las mujeres. Recordemos que las visiones eugenésicas y neomalthusianas se enfrentaban a leyes que en Estados Unidos, impuestas en Puerto Rico, prohibían como inmorales incluso la difusión de información acerca del control de natalidad. Aún con sus contradicciones y sin condonarlas, las prácticas eugenésicas y neomalthusianas trajeron hacia la discusión pública lo que habían sido temas tabú, la sexualidad y la regulación de la fecundidad. Y así abrieron espacios para que mujeres pobres los asumieran desde sus propias definiciones y necesidades. Las investigaciones sugieren que muchas mujeres participaron de manera activa en gestionar la esterilización y en las pruebas anticonceptivas de los 50 y los 60. Indican además que una amplia mayoría de las esterilizadas, nunca menor a 2/3 partes, no se arrepentía de la decisión. Y entre las razones de aquellas que se arrepintieron, predominaban el deseo posterior de tener más hijos, o el estar en una nueva relación, no el haberse sentido forzadas o desinformadas. Las puertorriqueñas, de hecho, han incrementado su uso anticonceptivo desde las primeras décadas del pasado siglo, 43% en 1953-54, hasta 78% de las casadas unidas en las últimas encuestas de salud reproductiva en el 1995-96. La esterilización femenina, que se registró en 7% en 1948, ascendió a más de una tercera parte desde 1965, hasta alcanzar 45% en 1995-96. Así, la tasa total de fecundidad descendía de más de 6 hijos por mujer en los 1930 a 2 en los 90, y ya era inferior al nivel de reemplazo desde principios de este siglo, 1.3 en el 2016. A las transformaciones sociales y económicas que dificultaban una problema numerosa, se unían redefiniciones en los roles de las mujeres y de la maternidad. El movimiento en favor del control de natalidad de principios del siglo XX se enmarcaba en la valoración de la maternidad como labor importante de socialización de la futura ciudadanía. Era un argumento de las sufragistas en su defensa del voto femenino y de políticas de bienestar materno-infantil en los servicios estatales. En esta redefinición, ser buena madre implicaba el cuidado de una prole en mejor estado, no necesariamente más numeroso, lo que supuso el apoyo de algunas feministas al movimiento de control de natalidad. Más adelante, las políticas de industrialización de mediados de siglo destacaron como valor una familia moderna, nuclear, independiente y reducida, con relaciones de pareja presuntamente más democráticas de comunicación y compañerismo. Para las mujeres, el empleo fuera del hogar y los servicios estatales les ofrecían oportunidades de avance en su autonomía, aunque contradictorias e incompletas, como salir del enclaustramiento doméstico y asumir decisiones en cuanto a su reproducción, pero se mantenía su responsabilidad incuestionada de la crianza con apoyos familiares y sociales limitados. Fue con el surgimiento de una segunda oleada feminista en los 70 que se articuló de manera más completa el reclamo de equidad para las mujeres y de su derecho a decidir sobre su capacidad reproductiva. Intersecando clase y nacionalidad, las feministas denunciaban los excesos y abusos en la esterilización y experimentación con puertorriqueñas pobres, pero también planteaban el acceso a la regulación de fecundidad, incluyendo el aborto, como un derecho individual. Hoy también reconocemos que la libertad y justicia reproductiva suponen no solo decidir, sino contar con las condiciones más amplias para hacerlo. Reconocemos que el control de la natalidad se ejerce aún en contextos de desigualdad de género y clase que constriñen las opciones de las mujeres. Razones económicas, la preocupación por la seguridad de hijos e hijas, la necesidad de apoyo para la crianza, la violencia en las relaciones de pareja y el asumir solas la maternidad son solo algunos de los conflictos que presionan a reducir la fecundidad, aun si se desean más hijos o hijas. Para 1995-96, de hecho, las encuestadas de todos los niveles de escolaridad indicaron un número ideal de proles superior al que en efecto tuviera. Es así que la reducción de la fecundidad no necesariamente ha conllevado una redefinición más profunda del rol de la maternidad, aunque se puedan haber cuestionado otras dimensiones de las relaciones de género. Las mujeres de más recursos, sin embargo, tienen más apoyos y acceso a proyectos de vida propia, que desplazan el peso de la maternidad como definición primordial, lo que propende a la planificación y al espaciamiento de nacimiento. Para las mujeres pobres, por su parte, Son mayores las presiones a reducir la fecundidad frente a la escasez de recursos, la inseguridad familiar y la comunitaria. Aún así, parece continuar entre estas una valoración de la maternidad que permanece como indicador de adultez, como escape a las restricciones en el lugar de origen o la continuidad del apoyo a la crianza de otros menores. Las mujeres de menos escolaridad en 95-96 indicaron así un número ideal de prole mayor que las de más educación y a través de las décadas hasta el 2020 han mostrado tener más hijos que las de más escolaridad y recursos. A ello ha contribuido que las mujeres de menos escolaridad conocían y utilizaban una menor diversidad de métodos anticonceptivos, aunque a partir de los 40 han sido las más propensas a recurrir a la esterilización, 50% comparado con 37% entre las demás escolaridades. Los estudios sugieren también que entre estas hay uniones y nacimientos más tempranos y un menor espaciamiento de los nacimientos. Así como que la esterilización ha tendido a practicarse a edades jóvenes y cuando ya se ha tenido una prole más numerosa. En eco de una historia de insatisfacción con los anticonceptivos, en el 95-96 encontramos asimismo que fueron mujeres de menos escolaridad quienes más adujeron razones de salud o incluso no sentirse a gusto en utilizar métodos como razón para abandonar la contracepción. Como parte de estas tendencias, es bueno recordar además que las mujeres pobres se ven limitadas en el acceso al aborto, que salvo excepciones no es costeado por el Estado. No hay duda de que la familiaridad que trajo la historia del control poblacional en Puerto Rico es parte de la continuidad en la práctica de esterilización entre mujeres de menos recursos. Pero a ello también contribuye aún la inconsistencia del gobierno de Puerto Rico en implantar una política amplia y comprensiva de salud reproductiva, lo que todavía hoy dificulta la información y el acceso a otros métodos. Para concluir, entonces, además de denunciar los abusos que ocurrieron en la experimentación de métodos y la esterilización entre mujeres puertorriqueñas, todavía hoy nos toca luchar por condiciones de equidad y justicia que posibiliten la libertad y justicia reproductiva. Se precisan aún estructuras económicas, políticas, sociales y de género que establezcan la seguridad y el bienestar, así como los apoyos a la crianza y las relaciones de pareja adecuadas, que viabilicen la decisión de aquellas que desean más hijos o hijas. Por otro lado, si la falta de información, acceso o los problemas con otros métodos promueven aún la esterilización entre mujeres pobres que desean regular su fecundidad, cabe demandar programas más amplios y comprensivos de salud reproductiva y de educación sexual que faciliten el uso de toda la diversidad de anticonceptivos. Procede además ofrecer una educación con perspectiva de género que permita a las mujeres oportunidades de desarrollo que no se circunscriban a la maternidad y que puedan sopesar en sus opciones reproductivas. Finalmente, en otro giro irónico, tenemos hoy que enfrentarnos al recrudecimiento de la ofensiva de sectores moralistas y fundamentalistas que pretenden revertir los avances de los derechos de las mujeres y forzar de nuevo la maternidad, esta vez a través de su oposición al aborto, y quienes ahora incorporan entre sus argumentos el temor a la reducción poblacional. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you.
Gracias, Alice.
American University
Profesora de Derecho.
Rico will talk about the transformation of the discourse and practices of Puerto Rico on sexuality and reproduction from the last decades of the 20th century to the present. Please welcome Esther from Guinea Pigs to Reproductive Justice Activists. And Alex, you want to, yeah, great, thanks.
Hi, good morning, good evening. I will be talking in Spanish as well, so please bear with me. Gracias a las organizadoras.
Thank you to the organizers of this activity to benefit.
Alice por la invitación a participar Quiero comunicarles que en el sector donde vivo ha habido un apagón general de la electricidad. Estoy funcionando con un generador. Si en algún momento hay un glitch, no se preocupen, vuelvo a conectarme. Es parte de la situación que vivimos hoy día en el país. He titulado mi presentación de conejillas de indias a activistas por los derechos reproductivos. Pretendo traer a la conversación el hecho de que las mujeres en Puerto Rico hemos logrado transformar ese rol pasivo que se nos asignó durante el periodo de la imposición de la esterilización y la experimentación con métodos anticonceptivos a un rol activo de reclamo de libertad reproductiva, equidad económica y social y un reclamo de que se nos permita tomar decisiones sobre si tener o no tener prole, cuándo, cuánta y con quién tenerla. Cuando hablamos del legado de las prácticas eugenésicas en nuestros países, estamos en un terreno discursivo involucrado en prácticas sociales que pueden abrir unos espacios de textura más compleja que la mera victimización y pueden permitir desplegar efectos diversos sobre la construcción de las subjetividades de las mujeres. Las experiencias habidas en Puerto Rico en torno a la utilización de las mujeres como conejillas de indias para los experimentos con anticonceptivos y la esterilización, aparte de haber sido una experiencia de victimización por la falta de información adecuada sobre los procedimientos, sobre los productos utilizados, sobre las consecuencias de estos y también sobre el consentimiento adecuado, también ofreció oportunidades contextuales y particulares que permitieron a las mujeres del país posicionarse como entes políticos y desestabilizar los significados victimizantes de los cuerpos de las mujeres. Las hijas y las nietas de las mujeres que que fueron utilizadas en estos experimentos y obligadas a esterilizarse o se esterilizaron sin la información completa, ya sea con consentimiento voluntario o de forma impuesta. Las hijas y nietas, repito, se han posicionado como activistas y actoras participantes en las fuerzas sociales que abogan hoy por los intereses de las mujeres, como atestigua la participante en el video y mi propia participación en esta actividad. Con el paso del tiempo, el discurso contra la eugenesia, la esterilización y los experimentos científicos a costa de las puertorriqueñas ha dado lugar al despliegue de nuevos significados como sujetas, desde las perspectivas de las propias mujeres y en la defensa de nuestros derechos sexuales y reproductivos. Un ejemplo de esto es la historia del derecho al aborto y la lucha por otros derechos sexuales y reproductivos en Puerto Rico. El aborto se convirtió en una práctica ilegal en Puerto Rico cuando el Código Penal de California se impuso en el país tras la invasión de Estados Unidos a Puerto Rico y tras la cesión de Puerto Rico por parte de España a Estados Unidos como botín de guerra. Independientemente de las normas jurídicas prohibitivas existentes desde entonces, 1902, por décadas las mujeres, 1902 cuando se extendió ese código a Puerto Rico, por décadas las mujeres en Puerto Rico habían recurrido a la práctica del aborto para terminar embarazos no deseados, arriesgándose a sufrir complicaciones debido a las condiciones de inseguridad e insalubridad en las que se realizaba. En Puerto Rico operaban varias clínicas privadas que cobraban honorarios excesivos para ofrecer servicios de terminaciones de embarazo, por lo que eran inaccesibles para la mayor parte de las mujeres. En su defecto, estas acudían a servicios de comadronas, enfermeras y otros proveedores clandestinos. Por ejemplo, hay datos que demuestran que, por ejemplo, en el 1958, en los hospitales del país se ofrecieron más de 5,000 servicios a mujeres, la mayor parte de estos para atender abortos incompletos iniciados clandestinamente. Mediante su práctica cotidiana, las mujeres construyeron una noción sobre el aborto como una opción, aunque no fuese legal. En esta coyuntura entendemos que las mujeres realizaron acciones al margen de las condiciones altamente restrictivas en las que vivían, no tenían acceso a las esferas del poder político o gubernamental, había imposiciones religiosas y culturales sobre la sexualidad que todavía existen y se manifestaba una gran inestabilidad en las relaciones de pareja y de familia debido a la migración hacia Estados Unidos causada por la extrema pobreza en que se encontraba el país y su población. En ese medio, las mujeres optaron por un posicionamiento ante el asunto del aborto que, aunque no fue vociferante como el de las activistas de hoy día, sí se convirtió en una fuerza constituyente silenciosa, la cual, por medio de la práctica discursiva cotidiana, reclamó la prerrogativa de controlar sus decisiones reproductivas, mientras confrontaba serias problemáticas de salud y jurídicas ante las normas y los patrones existentes. Posteriormente, en el 1980, el Tribunal Supremo de Puerto Rico, en el caso Pueblo versus Duarte Mendoza, interpretó el Código Penal de Puerto Rico y la disposición sobre aborto y determinó que en Puerto Rico el aborto es legal siempre y cuando que se realice para proteger la vida o la salud física o mental de la mujer en cualquier momento del embarazo en consulta con un médico, con el médico de la mujer embarazada. Es decir, que en ese caso, el Tribunal Supremo a través de ese caso, se convirtió en ley la práctica que las mujeres habían realizado por décadas. Así es que el discurso cotidiano, la práctica cotidiana de las mujeres terminó convirtiéndose en discurso jurídico. Todo esto mediante una práctica silenciosa, digamos, de sus opciones reproductivas. Aparte de esto, debemos señalar que, por otro lado, en ocasiones, el imponer una subjetividad de víctima producida por el legado de la eugenesia desconoce las múltiples luchas y aperturas que han impulsado a las mujeres con sus acciones cotidianas y su activismo. Independientemente del ámbito político que se presenta en un momento dado, es importante apreciar cómo en el espacio de 4 décadas, de los años 50 a los 90, por medio de un proceso casi imperceptible, las mujeres se han movido de ser sujetos de políticas públicas limitativas de sus derechos a una posición de subjetividad como actoras, por un lado silentes durante aquel periodo al realizarse abortos en la ilegalidad y utilizar los métodos anticonceptivos y la esterilización de acuerdo a sus necesidades y sus interpretaciones. Y finalmente al presente, y desde los 90 al presente, como agentes y portavoces activas de reclamos sobre la libertad reproductiva. Este cambio ha sido el resultado de una subjetividad de la que nos hemos empoderado como tenedoras de derechos. Y ante la ilegalidad del aborto, que coincidía en un periodo dado con la imposición de la esterilización y la experimentación con métodos anticonceptivos. Lo que quiero plantear es que durante el periodo que explicaba Alice y que se comentó en el video, aunque estaba ocurriendo la imposición de la esterilización y la experimentación con métodos anticonceptivos, a la vez las mujeres en acción contestataria se procuraban abortos clandestinos para atender la necesidad de controlar la cantidad de hijos. Por otro lado, las fuerzas que se oponen a la concepción de las mujeres como tenedoras del derecho a controlar sus decisiones reproductivas no se han mantenido en silencio. A través de las décadas han realizado y al presente llevan a cabo multiplicidad de acciones para tratar de revertir los derechos alcanzados. En ese proceso participa la Iglesia Católica, también una multiplicidad de denominaciones protestantes y evangélicas, otras instituciones poderosas en el país, religiosas, y algunas legisladoras y legisladores de partidos conservadores y fundamentalistas. Estos sectores se oponen al derecho al aborto, se oponen a la planificación familiar, se oponen al matrimonio igualitario, se oponen a la incorporación de la perspectiva de género en la educación pública, en el currículo, se oponen a la legislación que se ha presentado para establecer penalidades ante el feminicidio y el transfeminicidio. Se oponen a medidas legislativas que se han presentado para prohibir las prácticas de reversión de género, así es que, y a otras medidas progresistas. Así es que nos encontramos ante un sector en estos momentos que requiere, como en el pasado, una activación y ha requerido y ha generado una activación política muy fuerte por parte de las mujeres. Como un ejemplo de lo que hemos logrado en ese proceso de cambio de ser conejillas de indias a activistas de nuestros derechos, en las pasadas décadas la Asamblea Legislativa ha considerado proyectos de ley restrictivos sobre los derechos sexuales y reproductivos, instados por ese movimiento antiderechos que se hace llamar Provida, y que se oponen a todas esas medidas que hemos mencionado. Este movimiento ha llevado a cabo acciones para proteger las clínicas que proveen servicios de planificación familiar y de terminaciones de embarazo. Y en todos estos momentos en que ese sector opositor se moviliza y adquiere cierto poder en las esferas del poder político, las mujeres han mostrado un activismo fuerte que ha logrado detener, por ejemplo, proyectos de ley dirigidos a hacer más costoso y más difícil el acceso al servicio de terminación de un embarazo. eh, y como dije, se han movilizado a defender las clínicas y los profesionales de la salud que prestan los servicios que las mujeres necesitan e identifican como parte de su libertad reproductiva. También observamos una multiplicidad de investigadoras que producen trabajos sobre nuestros derechos, sobre lo que ocurre en relación a la violencia de género en el país. Participan en los medios de comunicación electrónica, en las redes sociales, la televisión, en la radio, una presencia muy activa de el sector de mujeres que defiende su libertad reproductiva, incluso el derecho a decidir usar anticonceptivos o no utilizarlos, y el derecho a utilizar una esterilización, pero con la información adecuada y con un consentimiento adecuado. En Puerto Rico, por ejemplo, en los años 90 surgieron grupos de mujeres dedicados a defender el derecho al aborto, como el Grupo Pro Derechos Reproductivos, y durante los últimos años, cuando el movimiento fundamentalista y opositor a los derechos de las mujeres ha estado muy activo, pues han surgido organizaciones nuevas, tales como la Organización Aborto Libre Puerto Rico, Marea Verde Puerto Rico, Todas Puerto Rico, la Colectiva Feminista en Construcción, y a esas luchas se han unido otras organizaciones defensoras de derechos humanos como Amnistía Internacional, Intermujeres Puerto Rico, la Coordinadora Paz para las Mujeres y muchas otras. Así es que cabe también señalar que una organización pro familias que se menciona en los escritos sobre el tema de la esterilización como criticada como una organización que alegadamente promovía la esterilización, durante los años 90 esa organización no solo cambió su nombre a llamarse Profamilias, en defensa de todo tipo de familia, sino que además amplió su perspectiva y brinda los servicios desde una perspectiva de derechos humanos con un acercamiento feminista que provee además educación integral en sexualidad a jóvenes y adolescentes, atención ginecológica gratuita y a bajo costo, y por otro lado, la defensa del derecho al aborto. Además, estableció una clínica, la clínica y ella dedicada a proveer ese servicio. Así es que llegado el siglo XXI, nuevas voces de mujeres, como dije, se han integrado a este proceso de cambio y han pasado a ser esas voces, unas voces activistas que reclaman por sus derechos en todos los sentidos. Este proyecto, el proyecto de defensa de la capacidad de las mujeres de tomar decisiones éticas sobre su cuerpo, sobre sus procesos reproductivos, sobre su sexualidad, es un esfuerzo constante. Y ante los ataques impulsados por los sectores conservadores, controladores, que quieren imponer visiones sobre el papel de las mujeres en las familias y en las sociedades, en estos momentos se recrudecen esos sectores, las acciones de esos sectores, y por otro lado, las respuestas de las mujeres ante esas poses y prácticas que imponen las sociedades patriarcales. Como sabemos, en Estados Unidos el Tribunal Supremo y las legislaturas de estados conservadores han establecido grandes limitaciones a los derechos fundamentales de las mujeres. Empezaron por el derecho al aborto. Se habla de eliminar el derecho a la anticoncepción como un derecho fundamental, dimanante de la libertad, y el derecho, por ejemplo, a una sexualidad libre. Y ante este momento histórico, es importante reflexionar que la equidad para las mujeres es un proceso, que no es un estándar constitucional, es un sueño dinámico que hemos ido construyendo con avances y retrocesos a lo largo de los siglos, paso a paso, día a día, década a década. Y en este momento, en el siglo XXI, que no escapa a ese proceso de avances y retrocesos, la denuncia del legado de la eugenesia, bien podríamos utilizarla para alertar sobre las diversas formas en que se ejercen los poderes públicos y políticos sobre nuestros cuerpos y nuestras vidas. Bien podría servirnos esta denuncia como guía hacia la defensa de nuestra libertad reproductiva en todas sus manifestaciones. Bien nos convendría analizar cuáles son las prácticas eugenésicas que están alimentando ese movimiento conservador y fundamentalista. ¿Qué es lo que pretende ese movimiento conseguir a través del control, el control de nuestros cuerpos, nuestras vidas y nuestra capacidad reproductiva? Muchas gracias.
And thank you, Esther. Edith Lopez, cultural anthropologist and professor at the City College of New York City, is our next speaker. She will
La
talk to
próxima habla sobre las complejidades.
oppressive social
em,
conditions that shape and constrain their reproductive options. Please welcome Edith.
Por favor, bienvenida la nueva Iris, la nueva participante. Iris, disculpa, tomé atrasado un poquito. Vou dar as boas-vindas
y a las más colegas por participar en esta mesa. Como mis colegas Alice y Esther han indicado, la historia de las mujeres puertorriqueñas es compleja. El enfoque de mi trabajo es sobre mujeres que me dijeron que querían esterilizarse. Mi meta en este trabajo fue tratar de comprender qué constituye libre voluntad dentro del marco de la vida de estas pobres mujeres. En otras palabras, ¿cuáles son las condiciones sociales, históricas, culturales y individuales en que ellas tomaron estas decisiones reproductivas? Mi investigación toma sitio en Nueva York y mi ponencia va a ser en inglés. Throughout the world, women want the freedom to control their bodies, fertility, and lives.
controlar sus cuerpos, fertilidad, sus vidas, y nadie toma decisiones sobre fertilidad en vacíos. Ellas lo hacen bajo condiciones sociales e históricas que restringen sus libertades reproductivas, examinando la vida de las mujeres, sus derechos reproductivos, necesidad de salud y preocupaciones, y especialmente el punto controversial de esterilización. Tendremos que entender de cómo las opciones reproductivas de las mujeres son afectadas de acuerdo con la raza, clase, género, sexualidad, estado legal, legados coloniales y las políticas del control reproductivo. Mi trabajo sobre esterilización en las mujeres de Puerto Rico es un estudio de casos que muestra la complejidad de mujeres, de razas, de deseos de controlar su fertilidad. Además, la condición social opresiva que moldea y restringe sus opciones reproductivas. Las preguntas primarias o básicas de mi trabajo fueron: ¿qué mantiene y perpetúa la alta tasa de esterilización de las mujeres puertorriqueñas? ¿De qué manera las mujeres puertorriqueñas tienen la experiencia esta de su esterilización? ¿Cómo es su experiencia? Si son únicas, si se comparan con mujeres pobres de otras partes del mundo. Y sobre cómo hablamos de libertad reproductiva dentro del legado y abuso de esterilización y control de población. Y analizar mis datos en ese sentido, uso mi modelo integral de libertad reproductiva y justicia social, construido a través de un análisis interseccional. Este abordaje transciende los constructos binarios de elección. Por un lado, una decisión personal que coloca el peso en las mujeres de forma individual en cuanto a abstraer ciertas situaciones. Por otro lado, las restricciones sociales determinan totalmente sus decisiones. En los años 60, en Nueva York, la esterilización era marcada como un control natal en Estados Unidos. Las mujeres de Puerto Rico estaban familiarizadas con los términos de operación, por ejemplo, un término usado para describir la esterilización. En el 74, después de una larga lucha de grupos de mujeres, activistas de diferentes comunidades, las directivas de esterilización fueron implementadas en Nueva York para proteger a las mujeres contra abusos de esterilización. Abuso que es solamente una partecita de la historia de las mujeres de Puerto Rico y su experiencia con la esterilización. La mejor forma que encontré para expandir los experimentos en relación a las mujeres de Puerto Rico es pasar tiempo hablando con esas mujeres y familias, buscando, combinando trabajos de trabajo y campo, en campo, con más de 25 años, donde las experiencias están desde las personas que querían la esterilización hasta las que consideraron o se consideraron víctimas de abuso de esterilización. Realicé, de hecho, 86%. 86 mujeres dijeron que sí lo querían y otras 96 mujeres dijeron que fueron víctimas de abuso de esterilización. Con esa alta tasa de esterilización de mujeres en la isla, fueron reproducidas en Nueva York. ¿Cuáles eran los paralelos en Puerto Rico, Estados Unidos y otras naciones en América Latina? Esos son analizando los motivos de por qué fueron esterilizadas. Es importante incluir y darle la trascendencia de lo que hablan las mujeres y contextualizarlo en la esfera social a la que pertenecían. Alice hizo un gran trabajo en relación a ello y voy con su análisis y vamos a seguir con otros factores que voy a traer aquí, sobre todo la pobreza. Dependiendo de la generación, sus ingresos anuales variaban entre $7,000 y $30,000. El 80% de las mujeres del estudio dijeron que las circunstancias económicas las afectaron fuertemente, las decisiones de ser esterilizadas o no. El 44% sintió que si la situación económica hubiera sido mejor, no hubieran practicado la esterilización. 66% de las mujeres en la generación y eran jefes de familia. 3/4 recibieron asistencia financiera. La pobreza no se atribuyó a un problema de sobrepoblación en los Estados Unidos como sí en Puerto Rico. La narrativa en Estados Unidos se define como un problema de bienestar social basado en la visión de que las mujeres pobres tenían bebés para recibir asistencia financiera, culpando a su pobreza. Entonces, la falta de servicios y el argumento que es la falta de atención y servicio de los hospitales privados orientó, claro, su elección, que, claro, eran realizadas considerando la tecnología reproductiva de la época. Los hospitales públicos tienen menos recursos, menos espacios, más pacientes para ofrecer una tasa, digamos, o para tener la ayuda para esa tasa era poner mujeres en grandes grupos, contrariamente de la idea individual que reciben las mujeres en los hospitales privados. Como no se menciona el diafragma, como las mujeres no saben usar los métodos correctamente, además de la esterilización, métodos anticonceptivos son ofrecidos, métodos que las mujeres no pueden controlar. La relación entre ellos en Estados Unidos, los médicos recomiendan la esterilización después de 3 cesáreas, así como en Puerto Rico, en Brasil, Colombia y República Dominicana. También en Estados Unidos hay una alta correlación entre cesárea y esterilización. La edad en que las mujeres se casan, el 66% de la generación de hijas fueron esterilizadas entre 25 y 29 años de edad, cuando se compara con las mujeres europeas y americanas, que fueron esterilizadas entre el 30 y 34%, porque en Estados Unidos empiezan a tener hijos más jóvenes. Todo varía por generación y además el género de los niños. Muchas de las mujeres en mi estudio, el 76% de ellas, usaron métodos de control de natalidad antes de ser operadas. Sin embargo, el 55%.
Women's familiarity with la operación. Women recommended la operación to one another. A common euphemism women use while talking about la operación is that they were going to close down the factory or cerrar la factoría. Poor women's fewer children, with the exception of women who are victims of sterilization abuse. Most women I interviewed adequately shared the view that sterilization was their decision because it was their body. They would do as they pleased. Women elaborated that most men rarely objected to a woman's decision to get sterilized. Just the couple disagreed about the desired number or gender of the children. Female subordination is another factor that influenced women to get sterilized. The fact that women are still responsible for child rearing. Religion, with the exception of some of the women in the grandmother's generation, did not seem to play a significant role in women's decisions not to get sterilized. Now, misinformation. 82% of the women in this study distinguished between the tying and the cutting of the fallopian tubes, since they mistakenly believe that if you have your tubes tied, this is a temporary operation, but if they are cut, it is permanent. This is a false distinction. Regret. Of the 96 women in this study, 33% regretted they were sterilized. 20% said they were happy about it. The remaining 47% claimed they were neither happy nor regretful. Conclusion. Women actively seek to transform and improve their lives, and controlling their fertility is one of the primary ways they do this. Even though all women's fertility options are limited by the types of contraceptives available, poor and racialized women's options are more constrained. I argue that the poor women in this ethnography make decisions within a parameter of oppressive conditions. Therefore, the constraints of their lives play an equally significant role in shaping their reproductive options and experiences. It is also important to note that while the socioeconomic forces that limit Puerto Rican women's fertility options are no more constraining for them than for other poor and racialized women worldwide, the historical antecedents that have led to the high rate of sterilization among Puerto Rican women are unique. The issue among Puerto Rican women is complex. On the one hand, with the exception of women who are victims of sterilization abuse, the majority of the women in this study claim that they made a decision between getting sterilized or continuing to have children under adverse conditions. Because of the limited nature of this so-called choice, however, many women feel that they had no other viable alternative but to opt for or accept sterilization. This is especially true for those women who regretted their reproductive decisions. In analyzing Puerto Rican women's history of sterilization, I deliberately reject the language of choice. Choice invokes ideas of free will based on individual freedom, part of the neoliberal ideology that promotes a binary framework of choice, no choice, voluntary, non-voluntary decision-making, and obscures the interplay between social constraints and women's desire to control their fertility. Although all women's decisions are socially mediated, middle and upper class women have more viable options from which to choose than poor women. Even though there are more contraceptives today than in the past, after experiencing problems with the pill and the intrauterine device, many Puerto Rican women continue to turn to la operación after generations of exposure to this reproductive technology. Familiarity with la operación combined with the high rate of misinformation about sterilization procedures further circumscribe Puerto Rican women's reproductive freedom by limiting their knowledge about the full range of reproductive options. The conditions of persistent poverty and the lack of access to safe, effective, convenient, and affordable birth control, legal abortion, and quality healthcare in conjunction with sterilization policies designed to control the rate of population control among poor racialized women play an equally important role in constraining women's reproductive options worldwide. Reproductive freedom means having viable alternatives and the proper social conditions that enable one to decide how many or even whether or not to have children. By not offering women alternatives such as quality health care, safe, effective, and convenient temporary methods of birth control for both men and women, affordable daycare centers, and a living wage, Puerto Rican women's fertility options have been effectively narrowed, frequently making sterilization the only viable alternative. Thank you.
And thank you, Esther. I'm sorry. Thank you, Iris. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. So Virginia Espino, PhD in 20th century US history and co-producer and lead historian of the award-winning documentary No Mas Bebés, is our next speaker. She will explore the impact of No Mas Bebés in art as a form of reckoning with medical violence, highlighting the role of grassroots activism and organizations in creating a counter-narrative to eugenic logics. Please welcome Virginia.
Hello, everyone. I hope I'm clear, loud and clear. Good evening, everyone. I'm calling in from ancestral Tongva Gabrielino land, also known as Los Angeles. I recognize the Tongva Gabrielino people as the original land caretakers of the location where I currently reside. And I offer my humble respect and gratitude to the ancestors, the elders, and all of my Tongva Gabrielino relations, past, present, and emerging, for the use of this land. Thank you to the conference organizers and all those involved in putting this incredible conference together, both the seen and the unseen labor. I am grateful to be here with you all. My talk focuses on the impact of the documentary film No Mas Bebés and what the impact that it's had on the anti-sterilization movement since its theatrical release in 2015. And for those of you who have not had the opportunity to screen the documentary, I want to share a 3-minute trailer with you.
Acá tenían camas todavía, mira. Y yo por dentro sí siento mucho tristeza. Recordar
¿Y por qué sientes tristeza, volver?
Pues, ¿sabes?
Mira,
pero tengo tristeza.
This baby boy became a citizen 1 minute ago. His mother does not have immigration papers.
Told they should be sterilized to save taxpayers' welfare.
Something drastic must be done about population growth.
The doctor walked in and said, "We cut your tubes." And I said, "Why?" He goes, "Well, you signed for it." I said, "Me?" I go, "I don't remember nothing." And I didn't tell my family. I didn't tell anybody.
They were extremely fearful, being told that you need emergency cesarean section. You can feel blood pouring down your leg. At that time, signing a consent for tubal ligation.
This is the emergency department in Los Angeles County, UFC Medical Center.
Some of them signed right in the midst of labor. Some of them don't even remember signing. Here I is, this young lawyer, and for the first time telling them, do you know that you've been sterilized?
We are suing HEW for non-compliance or non-enforcement, non-monitoring of the sterilization regulation.
It was just the beginning of the emergence of the civil rights movement in the Latino community. We were talking about abortion rights, all of the issues of feminism at that time. The idea that somebody could be forcibly sterilized seemed like something out of a mental institution out of the 1920s.
It's a claim that we're part of a greater goal of sterilizing the Mexican population that immigrates to Los Angeles. I mean, I'm offended by that. That's not what we did.
The way I felt when I was young, it doesn't change the way I feel in my heart now that I'm older. But it's there all the time. It's like when you bury somebody, you're always going to carry it on your head.
That's the trailer to the documentary No Más Bebés. And at the time of the world premiere, we received little interest from local public officials, little interest in attending the screening, little interest in the issue itself of this historic case of forced sterilization. And I specifically targeted Latinx leaders to receive invitations to attend our first screening. No one responded to my request. But I was not discouraged. I knew that this film would have an impact because I had laid the groundwork for community engagement activities around the themes in the film. And the response was positive. People were outraged upon learning of this history for the first time, and they wanted to be involved in any way that they could. So at the premiere, we had members of the California Latinas for Reproductive Justice and the Ovarian Psychos Bicycle Group in the audience. Both groups articulated a feminist analysis of bodily autonomy and called for freedom from traditional gender expectations. The outpouring of community support reminded me of what the sterilization survivors experienced in 1970s when news broke out of the sterilizations in 1974. Chicana feminists in the 1970s rejected the expectation that their life purpose should be to get married and to have children. And yet they were the loudest in supporting the Madrigal plaintiffs and their complicated marriages and their decisions to be in marriages that probably weren't the most egalitarian. The Ovarian Psychos and the California Latinas likewise challenge patriarchy, and critique traditional gender expectations. But they empathize with the controversial decisions Latinas or Latinx continue to make while navigating religious and cultural gender expectations that date back to the 1950s. So here you have these two organizations that are creating their lives in direct opposition to these traditional values, yet supporting those women who find themselves in traditional marriages and traditional relationships. So community support of the film led to important conversations about reproductive justice and inspired creative projects that have added nuance to this hidden history since the film premiered in 2015. I met Daisy Patton, pictured here, a multidisciplinary artist from Los Angeles in 2016, when she reached out to me regarding a project she was developing to both honor the bravery of the sterilization survivors and to bring this little known history to a new audience, the art world. I agreed to work with Daisy because I felt her goal was honorable. She was adamant that she wanted to work with the Madrigal plaintiffs themselves, or at least develop this project in collaboration with them. And she would only conduct this project if she had their permission to go forward. 3 of the women featured in No Más Bebés agreed to have their representation included in Daisy's visual documentation of sterilization abuse in the US from the 1920s to the 1970s. Put Me Back Like They Found Me was the title of her exhibit that centers the stories of survivors of the horrific but not uncommon practices of forced sterilization in the United States. And here you have an image of one of the Madrigal plaintiffs, Maria Hurtado, when she was younger, probably from the 1970s. Daisy embroidered the portraits of survivors as, quote, a nod to domestic labor, in quotes, women's work. And she used, quote, thread as a metaphor for life. As part of her desire to make the work one of collaboration, Daisy asked the survivors to provide her chosen element of significance in their lives. And in this case, Maria Hurtado chose birds that she was given as a wedding gift from her spouse. The artwork was exhibited at the Ansuch Medical Campus in Aurora, Colorado in 2020. But unfortunately, the pandemic prohibited in-person visits and therefore limited the reach of this incredible exhibit. There are some images online. If you're interested, I'm happy to put in links in the chat. But the online forums that took place served to bring this history to a new audience. And I appreciated greatly how Daisy used her art as a vehicle to reflect on medical violence and to reckon with what reproductive choice means when white supremacist patriarchy is the order of the day. The director of No Más Bebés, the incredible Renee Tajima Peña, she believes that documentary film cannot cause social change, or that documentary film does not cause social change. And I do agree with her. Instead, she believes that it's people power. People power leads to change, not the film itself. But I would like to add that what I've witnessed over the years that this film first screened is really that No Más Bebés has inspired change. It has inspired legislative change, and it has inspired a culture shift. In 2018, the most powerful body in Los Angeles, the LA County Board of Supervisors, issued a formal apology to all of the victims of sterilization abuse, of unwanted sterilizations performed at the Los Angeles County Hospital during the 1970s. And for the first time since the news broke out about these abuses, we saw a public acknowledgement of the wrongdoing, and this was huge. Supervisor Sheila Kuehl, here pictured in purple, stated that, quote, for hundreds of years, women have been victimized by patriarchal and racist healthcare policies. The women affected by this practice led the rest of their lives deprived of full reproductive freedom, an incalculable loss to themselves and to their families, unquote. Supervisor Hilda Solis, an ethnic Mexican-American supervisor, pictured here with a purple shirt and a gray suit, stated that, quote, the tremendous physical and emotional harm to these women, their families, and our communities cannot be undone. But we owe them our heartfelt apologies and a visual memorial, a plaque at LAC USC Medical Center that will remind current and future generations of this past injustice so that this tragedy will never happen again, unquote. I personally was moved to tears. I'm pictured here with the floral dress, black, blue, and yellow. I was moved to tears by the idea that a permanent recognition of the abuse would be installed on hospital campus grounds. By 2018, I had spent several years touring across the United States with No Más Bebés, screening the film at medical schools, high schools, and community organizations such as Visión y Compromiso. I knew that the public was on our side, on the side of the survivors, and it was a beautiful feeling to witness lawmakers apologize and to attempt a repair of harm done. Mrs. Consuelo Hermosillo, one of the Madrigal plaintiffs, pictured here with a black shirt and black and white pants, delivered a powerful statement at this meeting where we convened for the apology. She discussed how she had lived with the shame that this sterilization took place. She believed that she had done something wrong, that she was not awake enough to understand what was taking place. She felt that she was in error. After this apology, she finally realized that this is a violation of violence that was done to her. She spoke of how an apology would allow her to live the rest of her life free of the shame that had haunted her for over 40 years. While some Latinx leaders have recently shown themselves to be no better than the racist white male predecessors who put up legal and extra legal barriers to true equality and justice, in Los Angeles, we have a movement of progressive leaders who are interested in transforming how the city views and serves its diverse population. Jorge Orozco, the Chief Executive Officer of Los Angeles County USC Medical Center, is one of those progressive leaders. That's not him pictured here. I probably should have had a photo of him. And when he caught wind of the Board of Supervisors' apology and called for a memorial plaque, he immediately committed funds to erect a large-scale memorial and recognition monument. So instead of a small plaque placed on the campus, I think it was about $80,000 was earmarked to this larger recognition site, what you are witnessing here on this slide. Unfortunately, because the memorial is so huge, you can't really get a sense of the beauty of it and the wide scale. Through a nationwide competition sponsored by the Los Angeles City Arts Commission, Feng Huyen, pictured here, won the opportunity to create the memorial. Her work was unveiled just a few months ago and has received, once again, wide-scale media attention, bringing this history to a new audience and re-emerging or reinvigorating interest in this case. Although Feng does not identify as Latinx, she connects with this history because of her immigrant background. She herself grew up in an underserved community, and she watched her working class family work very hard to make ends meet. Feng wants her sculpture to be a physical expression of the Los Angeles County's apologies to the women and families harmed by coercive sterilization. She also wants it to be a reminder of the courage it took 10 working class ethnic Mexican women to file a class action suit against this incredibly large public hospital. And she wants to show the courage it took for them to once again come out in public and appear in this documentary, No Más Bebés. And finally, I should also mention, last slide, that No Más Bebés inspired an apology to the survivors of sterilization abuse and their families on behalf of the state of California. So we had the local apology in Los Angeles and then the statewide apology issued by the governor. California leaders, at the behest of movement activists from various social justice organizations, have moved to redress historical injustices of the past with monetary compensation. This kind of formal recognition of medical and state-sanctioned violence cannot repair the harm done, nor give the Madrigal plaintiffs the justice they deserved. But it does point to new efforts at repair and restitution that might lead to the healing of a community so violently harmed by this practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Virginia. Our next speaker, Pat Zavella, PhD in anthropology at the University of California, Berkeley, and Professor Emerita of Latin American and Latino Studies at the University of California, Santa Cruz, will talk to us about reproductive justice, activism against eugenics restrictions on women's reproductive rights. Please welcome Pat.
Thank you very much for the invitation. And I'm really pleased to be in such esteemed company. And I have to say, Virginia is a very hard act to follow. The reproductive justice movement uses the frameworks of intersectionality and human rights and engages in grassroots organizing and coalition building, policy advocacy, and strengths-based discourse about women of color. Reproductive justice activists are allied with those who provide reproductive health services, such as Planned Parenthood, and with those who pursue reproductive health policies, such as the Center for Reproductive Rights that won the 2016 Supreme Court ruling, Whole Woman's Health v. Hellerstedt. The mission of the reproductive justice movement is to advocate for people's human right to bear children or terminate pregnancies free from stigma, abuse, or obstacles, to raise children in healthy environments, and to bodily autonomy that includes the choice of gender identity. They explicitly counter the fundamental tenets of eugenics, the notion of racial purity, by advocating for racialized women and organize the marginalized, including the undocumented, LGBTQ folks, youth, the disabled, and those living in rural areas. There are over 30 nonprofits in the United States and one in Canada that focus on reproductive justice. While many work with specific racial ethnic constituencies like California Latinas for Reproductive Justice that Virginia mentioned, they also strategically use the political identity women of color and work in coalition with many other social movements. Reproductive justice advocates insist that sterilization or the denial of abortion services are symptoms of structural inequalities that must be addressed. So they advocate for healthcare access, living wages, immigration reform, affordable housing and childcare, paid family leave, environmental justice, etc. In my book on the movement for reproductive justice, I deployed the concept reproductive governance, initially formulated in the context of repressive reproductive rights in Latin America, to critique how various actors use legislative controls, economic inducements, moral injunctions, direct coercion, and ethical incitements to produce, monitor, and control women's reproductive behaviors and practices in the United States. Once viewed as a bastion of conservatism in relation to women's reproductive rights, Latin America is making some progress as 9 countries have liberalized reproductive rights, even as our country is moving backwards. Reproductive governance goes back to the founding of this country with the control of women's reproduction during slavery. Today, 100 days after the Dobbs decision, 66 clinics across 15 states have stopped offering abortion care. I argue that in the current post-Roe crisis that limits access to abortion services is based on implicit eugenics thinking by proponents of reproductive governance, since those limits disproportionately affect poor women of color. Led by Christian nationalists, the anti-abortion movement has a long history and began targeting the Supreme Court as a means of nullifying Roe v. Wade in the late 1970s. The recent celebration, there's a long history of how white supremacy sort of shaped this movement that I don't have time to go into. But the recent celebration by Representative Mary Miller, that the Supreme Court ruling was a benefit to white life, exposed the links of Christian nationalism to white supremacy. Further, cruelty is central to white nationalism. We have a long history of celebrating the pain and suffering of people of color that goes back to the founding of this nation through extermination of Native Americans, as well as the spectacles around lynchings, and more. Cruelty toward people of color became particularly evident during the Trump administration and after, as white supremacists worry about being replaced by immigrants of color. Trump maligned Black Lives Matter supporters, Mexicans, Chinese, and Muslims. Cruelty as deterrence was the point in Trump's immigration policies that separated families and denied abortions to immigrants. Political theorist Cristina Beltran argues that cruelty has integrative functions. For those invested in the ideology of whiteness, racial exclusion, violence, and domination produce a sense of membership, creating common sense understanding of community, opportunity, futurity, and possibility. Cruelty is clearly seen in efforts to deny abortions to women experiencing medical emergencies and sensitivities to those forced to bear children or who suffer from botched abortions, to the high rate of infant mortality by African Americans, and to the unwanted children who would be born and likely to be pushed into our dysfunctional foster care system. The insensitivity to the social suffering that will occur reflects anti-abortionist belief that fetal rights supersede those of pregnant people. Some states have codified fetal personhood into law with the goal of a Supreme Court ruling in their favor. These institutional and discursive violences are part of what reproductive justice advocates view as reproductive injustice, which includes lack of information about sexuality and sexual health, discrimination in healthcare systems, lack of access to sexual and reproductive health care, and poor quality of sexual and reproductive health information and services. Reproductive justice social activists have responded to the Dobbs ruling with 4 sets of strategies. First, activists believe we should focus on those disproportionately affected. Those who get abortions are usually low income and predominantly people of color. Among those aged 15 to 44, there were 23.8 abortions per 1,000 Black women, which is twice that of Latinx's and more than 3 times that of whites. 61% of those who have abortions already have 1 or more children, and 99% believe their abortion was the right decision even after 5 years. The recent increase in abortions is related to the decrease in access to contraception perpetrated by the Trump administration's restricted funding of women's reproductive health. There was an 8% increase in abortions from 2017 to 2020 that coincides with the Trump administration's gag rule that disallowed counseling about or referrals for abortion, defunded Title X, supported abstinence-only sex education, and Trump's racist xenophobic discourse that scared many immigrants from accessing any health care services as well as social services. Being unable to get abortions increases women's poverty and unemployment rates. Being denied an abortion and forced to carry a pregnancy to term can be a death sentence, particularly for Blacks and Native Americans who experience disproportionately high maternal mortality rates because healthcare systems that service Black and Native American pregnant people are discriminatory and insensitive. These people often reside in states that did not expand Medicaid after passage of the Affordable Care Act, which denies coverage soon after the birth of a child when people still may be at risk for serious health problems. Depending on where they live, Blacks are 3 times more likely to die because of pregnancy-related conditions. In Los Angeles, 5 times more, while in New York City, 12 times more, while Native Americans are 4 times more likely to experience maternal death in Seattle. Michelle Goodwin points out that in the United States, a woman is 14 times more likely to die in pregnancy or childbirth than during an abortion. Clearly targeted regulation of abortion provider laws are not about protecting women's health, but controlling women's behavior. Further, it is often impossible to even obtain an abortion on some Native American reservations, where more than half of American Indian and Alaska Native people access healthcare because of the colonial legacy of a 1996 memo by Indian Health Services that stipulated women had to report rape or incest within 60 days to access federal funds. Abigail Echohawk points out that in the past 20 years in Seattle, for example, there were fewer than 10 abortions because of these restrictions, and all of this was before the fall of Roe. Reproductive justice advocates have noticed that public outrage often does not highlight these consequences, so they are calling attention to the stories of those who have survived these structural violences and those who have not. In light of the implicit racial underpinnings of anti-abortion policies, many activists see the focus on pro-choice when it ignores the experiences of people of color as problematic, since it silences the links of anti-abortion movement to white supremacy, the structural causes of increased demand for abortions, and the detrimental effects on women of color. Secondly, activists have long been preparing for this restriction on abortion services. In 2016, the Center for Reproductive Rights and Justice at the University of California, Berkeley organized informative events about self-managed abortion so that providers and supporters would be prepared. Medication abortions now account for 54% of abortions in the United States. However, increasingly they are criminalized even in states where they are not illegal. Native American activists have long referred women to abortion doulas and healthcare providers off the reservation. Repro Action has confronted social media corporations that suppress information about accessing abortions. In California, Planned Parenthood began preparing for the fall of Roe and increase in out-of-state patients in 2021. These activists see their work in the post-Roe era as continuing what they have been doing. Third, there are ongoing stereotypes that women of color do not support abortion. In Albuquerque, for example, reproductive justice advocates had to convince their coalition partners that Latinxes could be swayed to vote against a proposed municipal ban on abortion in 2013, and in the end, they were successful. Actually, women of color repeatedly expressed their support for abortion at rates higher than those of white women, and their support has increased over time. In a Pew Research Center survey conducted after the Dobbs decision, 62% of Americans believe abortion should be legal in all or most cases. However, 82% of Black people support Roe v. Wade, and 85% of Asian and Pacific Islanders support abortion access. Several recent large-scale surveys found that Latinxes, despite large numbers who are Catholic or evangelical, overwhelmingly back abortion rights. My own ethnographic research in South Texas shows that even when women are highly religious, they understand that abortion is a political right. Actually, they call it a human right, and they support it. Further, women of color, like other women, are donating funds at higher rates than before so that abortion access is available to all. Activists suggest we must dispel stereotypes that women of color are anti-abortion and highlight all the stories of people's struggles for their rights. Fourth, drawing inspiration from immigrant rights and Black Lives Matter activism, coalitions in Austin, Chicago, California, Oregon, and more have announced they are sanctuaries for those seeking abortions. Professional associations have passed resolutions that view providing abortions as contributing to anti-racism and dismantling of white supremacy as part of reproductive justice. Over 600 healthcare practitioners and activists requested that the media stop writing stories that give equal space to anti-abortion extremists. Proposition 1, that would amend the California Constitution to prohibit the state from denying or interfering with an individual's reproductive freedom, is on the November ballot and favored to pass. Colorado recently passed the Reproductive Health Equity Act that codifies people's fundamental right to make reproductive health care decisions free from government interference and offers a year's supply of birth control and contraceptive counseling funded through state Medicaid, even to the undocumented. The Red River Women's Clinic in Fargo, North Dakota, that provides services to many Native Americans, moved its facility across the river to Moorhead, Minnesota, where abortions are legal. In the post-Roe era, as the demand for abortions, tubal ligations, and vasectomies has increased, activists in many states have dramatically increased information about local restrictions and how to access reproductive health services and support, such as childcare or travel funds, on their websites and through webinars, in-person events, and on social media. So as to counter misinformation campaigns targeting Latinxes in Spanish, activists prepared informational leaflets for distribution at clinics and community centers. Fact Chequeado, a Spanish language fact-checking service that focuses on the United States, launched in 2022 to counter dangerous claims about abortion circulating on social media. A key piece of information is that Reproductive Legal Defense Fund and Digital Defense Fund provide information about how to conduct online searches to access abortion in safe ways. Many reproductive justice organizations are in contact with reproductive rights activists in Latin America and use the color green in their protests to signal their solidarity with them. In some, social activists are determined and surprisingly optimistic in creatively pushing back on reproductive governance and its implicit eugenics thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you. I'm going to ask all of the panelists, please, to start your video, and so we can join together and unmute yourself. So I think we're missing, here comes Esther. Great. Okay. Great. So I want to thank you all for some quite thought-provoking presentations. And we have 20 minutes now. We will be running over, but we do have approval to do that. To be able to share with those attending, what are our thoughts on next steps? And there are 6 of us. And so if you don't mind, what I think the easiest way to do this is to give each of us 3 minutes, and I'll just call on you all. So with your approval, I'm going to go ahead and proceed. So I'm going to invite you to start with, what do you see as the next in this fight against reproductive injustice and for reproductive justice?
Thank you. I hope to be able to do this in 3 minutes. The assault on women's reproductive rights is inseparable from the slowly emerging fascism that we are experiencing in our daily lives and that is cropping up globally. In the United States, we're experiencing it daily in the income gap, voter suppression, censoring and banning of books, the normalizing of the January 6th attack on the Capitol, widespread homelessness, the unapologetic public killing of African American and other people of color, the overturning of legislation to conceal weapons, the stark ravings of religious fundamentalists, and the pathologizing of immigrants and the LGBT community. This year, the Supreme Court repealed legal abortion in the United States, regardless of the fact that 70 to 80% of the American public wanted legal abortion. Since the Dobbs ruling, an estimated 26 US states will ban abortion regardless of whether women have been raped or are incest survivors, as Pat noted. The Dobbs ruling is an unforgivable crime against women and men, but it especially hurts poor Latinas, African American, disabled, indigenous, and transgendered women. The banning of legal abortion will lead to a rise in the rate of sterilization among poor women as their reproductive options are further limited. To fight against this neoliberal environment, we must continue to build coalitions and work together to fight for legal abortion and against other social injustices. We must fight against the lies that neoliberal Republicans and social media spread and continue to educate each other. We must continue to work side by side with different communities to address grievances such as sterilization, abuse, reparations, and the high rate of misinformation about sterilization among Puerto Rican women and other women as well. We need to work with immigrant organizations to protect against unnecessary hysterectomies and tubal ligations, such as the case of abuse which recently took place in the Immigration and Customs Enforcement camps, ICE. And of course, organize more conferences, I think, that will help us mobilize, keep us informed, and help us mobilize globally. To end, historically, our communities have battled against colonialism, sexism, racism, and classism. We are strong, our communities are strong, and together we can continue to bring about positive social change.
That was perfect. You had 16 seconds left. But and you covered so much in that. So thank you very much for doing that. Virginia.
I couldn't say that better. So eloquently, Edie Lopez. Thank you so much for that. I just have one thing to say, and that is we need to fund nonprofit organizations. They've been on the ground for years fighting this fight. We need to work with them. We need to join them. We need to participate on their boards. And I'm talking specifically the United States. You know, I can't speak for the rest of Latin America, but I know in the US, there are nonprofits like the California Latinas for Reproductive Justice, like Sister Song, like all of the organizations that Pat discusses in her book. They need us to help them raise money so that they can continue this fight that they've been in since the 1970s.
Right. Thanks, Virginia. Thanks. Yeah. Alice.
And a couple of things. I agree totally with what Iris suggested, of course. Thinking about the series of presentations, I would suggest that we continue without looking at other ways in which reproductive justice has been undermined, and also take understanding how women have goodness and how women have taken over their experiences and used whatever resources they have had available to do their reproductive decisions. So I think that we would have to continue doing that kind of analysis.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Esther.
Yes, hello. I will add just a few words to what has been said. I agree with all the suggestions that have been made. I keep thinking about the connection between the fundamentalist discourse and laws and legal processes that are happening at present, and what is the purpose of all this. As was explained by Virginia, this is in order to get white America, but I think they will see an unexpected result from all that process regarding limitations on abortion, on access to contraceptives, and to reproductive freedom, because it's going to be affecting poor women of color, as they call them in the US. We say mujeres comunes y corrientes. So I would like to continue researching on this, and going from there to something else that has been happening and hasn't been mentioned, and most of us here are academics. There's a huge a danger for academic freedom. And some people have been writing about this. This has been going on in the United States for maybe a decade or more. The fundamentalist movement is undertaking public universities and colleges governance. And here in Puerto Rico, we have been experiencing attacks from conservative legislators, from the even the assembly, when we appear before them to defend women's rights and reproductive freedom, they have been attacking us, and they have been calling on the board of directors of our university to deal with us. So I think we should also be concerned regarding academic freedom. We need academic freedom in order to continue researching on these matters and writing and talking about this, and also in order to work with NGO, non-governmental organizations that provide services and support women. But if academic freedom is under attack, and if we lose that freedom, I think the future is going to be even more difficult for all of us. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. Yeah. If you don't mind, I'd like to, from my own experience, be able to add in some thoughts, if that's okay. And one is, I was very surprised at this. I was in a conversation with my daughter, who's 51 and is half African-American and half Caucasian. And I was telling her that I was unexpectedly going to be chairing this panel and what it was about. And I used the word eugenics, and I was flabbergasted. She had no idea what eugenics meant. She hadn't heard the term, and she's very cognizant and very aware. She, as one woman said to me at one point, I'm talking about her own Native American background, my daughter presents as African-American, so she experiences all of that kind of racism. So I was flabbergasted. And so, sorry, I was timing, I've been timing all of this. Someone time me, please. So, continuing education, like No Mas Bebes, and the films that I'm producing, we're trying to connect the real importance of the rights we have and how it's changed women's lives as inadequately as they have been implemented, how absolutely important they are. So I think we've got a lot more education to do, which really surprised me. So that's one piece. I think the other piece to me is it's the reproductive justice framework that, to me, the piece that says sustainable lives for children, that's about changing the whole friggin' society. And that's huge. I mean, that's about the change in my opinion, our economic system, and making sure we really have a democracy. And until those changes are made, the word that came to me today is we're working at the fringes. And I think we still need to work at the fringes. But the fundamental change is not going to happen until those major systems are changed. Racism, eugenics is built into the system of capitalism. It's absolutely systemic. And you can't shift all the different policies, the ways it shows up, from eugenics to welfare queen to mass, to mass incarceration, until we really shift that system. And there are so many pieces to shift it. One of which I think is we really need to shift the corporate, oh dear, I'm losing my language here for a moment. I'm having a senior moment. It's the corporate document. Until it says that the idea that the goal of a corporation is to be a good citizen and provide clean air and clean water and fertile earth and safe working conditions, healthy environment. We're in conflict continuously. It's a continuous ongoing conflict that we're embedded in. I think in terms of democracy at this point, the most important thing we could do is focus on voting. If we don't have voting, we don't have the rights, we don't have our vote counted, we don't have reproductive rights, we don't have equal pay. All of these rights, because we are not part of the political power structure anymore. So those are not the specific reproductive. To me, they create the environment for reproductive justice. So that's where I came out in my thinking about, what do I think are the next steps? And I think we've got probably a lot of work to do around this next election to hopefully retain enough political power that maybe we can move some things forward. So those are my thoughts. Pat, handing it over to you.
Thank you. It's so wonderful to speak after my eloquent colleagues, Edie's and Virginia, and everyone have really sort of framed the issues very broadly, which I really appreciate. And it's one of the things I agree with in the movement of reproductive justice, that you can't talk about eugenics without talking about all the inequalities and the way in which it very much resonates with sterilization abuse or lack of access to contraception. And really, it's all about political power. One of the things we see happening in California is that recently, the governor just signed 13 laws that protect reproductive rights. And this was the product of coalition work around the state, where people were working with non-governmental organizations or community-based organizations like CLRJ to draft bills and to work with legislators and to lobby for them, and then to pressure the governor, because it isn't always a done deal that he will sign legislation that's progressive. And that seems like a productive process to start. But we're in California, and some of my research was in Texas, where things like that are not going to happen anytime soon. And when you talk to the most vulnerable people, they understand exactly the power relations that are at play. And so I think I agree we need to continue doing research and talking to the most vulnerable and circulating their points of view so that other people understand what happens to them. And we need to continue teaching so that our students are educated and understand, that they can find their life's work, which can be on the side of social justice. I guess I just want to end very briefly. I was at a recent leadership summit in Santa Clara County. And one of the things they're doing in the state of California is all the counties are setting aside resources and establishing processes so that they can deal with all of the out-of-state people who are coming here to access reproductive health care, and including abortions. And she said those plans are going to be up online as soon as they're finalized. And the plans are going to be available in Santa Clara County in Vietnamese and in Spanish. So these are going to be accessible to everyone in the state of California. And it just made me see we have a new state formation that's very much influenced by the changing demographics in our state and by community-based organizations that are pressuring and demanding that we pay attention to who's in our community. So this leaves me with the sense that we have a lot of struggle to be involved in if we're going to save our democracy and if we're going to pay attention to social justice for people in our communities.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you very much. It was in a way, a great summary of all the things that the various different ideas we have for the next steps. And I sure hope that the recording has captured all of our ideas so that we can return to those, in the future. And I want to give a big thanks to all of those who've been attending tonight. We hope you've inspired into thoughtful action. And a special thanks to Benedict and Miros from Small Beginnings Project and UC at Santa Barbara for making this conference possible, shining a light on eugenics legacies across Latin America. And now I'm going to turn this over to Miros, who will put some closing remarks and some thoughts on about the various ways we can all stay connected in this continuing conversation. And thank all you panelists for all of your wonderful presentations. Thank you so much.